Children march toward a meat grinder and are turned into ground meat, while an authoritarian teacher watches everything and laughs. No, this isn't the synopsis of a horror movie, but rather a scene from one of the greatest classics rock has ever produced. Today we're going to decipher all the symbolism in the Another Brick in the Wall trilogy by Pink Floyd. What? You didn't know it was a trilogy? That's right, I'm Guilherme, and you're watching Decipher Hits.
All in all, you're just another brick in the wall.
When we talk about rock anthems, one of the first things that comes to mind is the unforgettable chorus of Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2 from the 1979 album The Wall. But few people know that this song was inspired by the traumatic past of the singer Roger Waters, whose childhood was haunted by death and abuse. And despite the immeasurable impact this work had, not only on music in general, but also on the history of humanity, the album wouldn't exist if it weren't for a spitting incident. To understand all of this and how this incredible work of art came about, we need to go back to the 70s, a time when Pink Floyd was one of the biggest bands around. Formed in '65, the band was one of the pioneers of progressive rock, and already had hugely successful albums to its name, like Dark Side of the Moon from '73, Wish You Were Here from '75, and Animals from '77. However, the massive success and the millions of albums sold ended up having a negative side effect. They attracted a new generation of extremely alienated and rowdy fans who went to the shows just to cause chaos. In '77, Pink Floyd embarked on a marathon of concerts around the world, on a tour marked by the band's emotional exhaustion and tension among the members. Roger Waters, in particular, was becoming increasingly mentally fragile as the tour went on. Besides the tense atmosphere among his bandmates, he found himself frustrated with his work, and he thought that the shows had become a kind of social event, where everyone only cared about partying and hardly paid attention to the music, let alone the messages behind them. This cultural alienation made the packed stadiums actually feel empty. At the last show of the tour, a group of fans was disrupting the concert, setting off fireworks and shouting nonstop. The lead singer stopped the show to call out the group, but they didn't care at all and kept messing around at the venue. That's when Roger lost his patience and spat in the direction of the group. After that, the band's producer advised the lead singer to talk to a friend who is a psychologist. And during the conversation, Roger reported that at that moment, he had only one desire: to build something that would separate him from that uncontrolled and alienated audience. Something like a wall. His answer ended up revealing a trauma he had carried since his childhood. From there, Roger realized that he could create an entire album based on this concept. He took the initial seed of this idea and expanded it, adding his own personal experiences to develop the story of the new album. And so, on November 30th, 1979, the album The Wall was born, telling the story of a bitter and depressed rock star named Pink, going through a traumatic childhood, an extremely strict and authoritarian education, a failed marriage, and a career filled with excesses. Throughout his journey, Pink isolates himself more and more from everything and everyone, building a huge wall around himself, where each brick represents a trauma from his life. Pink obviously represents the alter ego of Roger Waters, as he confirmed in an interview with the BBC. At its core, The Wall was an autobiographical work. With 2 discs, each containing 13 tracks, the album is a true musical epic lasting 1 hour and 20 minutes, with such a captivating story that it was even adapted into a movie. A feature film with the same name as the album, where we can also find the symbolic 3-part structure of Another Brick in the Wall. That's right, a lot of people don't know this, but this song is divided into 3 parts, with part 2 being the most famous of all. But don't worry, we're going to break down each one of them. Daddy flew across the ocean, leaving behind only a memory, a picture in the family album. Daddy, what else did you leave for me? The first part has sadness as its main theme. Here, Pink starts to build an emotional wall around himself to try to deal with the loss of his father. This has a direct connection to Roger Waters' life. He himself lost his father in 1944 during World War II, when he was only 5 months old. This was almost like a hereditary curse since his grandfather had met the same fate, but in World War I. Despite that, Roger acknowledges that, just like with any song, the lyrics are open to various interpretations.
It's not just a simple story about someone who dies in the war and then goes back to school, but rather about abandonment in a more general sense.
The death of his father made young Roger experience grief without even having known him, and at a very young age. This ended up generating mixed and confused feelings in him, such as anger, which is the second of the 5 stages of grief, and we can see it intensifying along with the progression of the song, when Pink calmly asks what his father left for him.
Daddy, what else did you leave for me?
And then in a much more aggressive way,
Daddy, what you leave behind for me?
and right after, as if answering his own question, Pink sings,
All in all it was just a brick in the wall.
in the end, it was just another brick in the wall. In the end, they were just bricks in the wall. Recognizing then that the absence of his father was the first brick in building Pink's wall of trauma. In the movie, this part is represented by little Pink walking alone through a playground in his city. His mother had gone shopping, and with no adult around, Pink asks a stranger for help to get on the playground equipment. When the man leaves with his own son, Pink follows him and tries to hold the man's hand, as if he is looking for a father figure in him. The man then sends the boy away, and he goes back to playing alone. And so begins the interlude, The Happiest Days of Our Lives. Although it doesn't share the same name, this interlude creates a bridge between the first and second parts of the trilogy. It also has meaningful lyrics. At this moment, Pink, now a teenager, is up to mischief alone on the train tracks, placing a bullet on the rail and waiting for the train to pass. The game ends when he is confronted by a teacher who tells him to stand still. At this moment, we see flashes where a strange mask appears on his face, which hints at something bizarre that you will soon understand. The very title of the interlude is already a strong protest. It's ironic, given the notion that school days are the happiest time of our lives, since in Roger Waters' case, it was actually a time of a lot of anguish and suffering. Here, the focus of the narrative is on the totalitarianism of the educational system and the abuses by teachers in the 1950s and 60s, especially in boarding school systems. In the album version, this interlude begins with the sound of children playing during recess, which is quickly overshadowed by the sound of helicopters flying over the school and teachers shouting at the students through megaphones. And right in the first lines, Pink reveals what his biggest problem with school is. When we grew up and went to school, there were certain teachers who hurt the children in every way they could. By mocking everything we did and exposing all our weaknesses, no matter how carefully the children tried to hide them. Roger's problem wasn't with the school as an institution itself, but with the abusive teachers who exploited the students' weaknesses and humiliated them, sometimes even resorting to physical aggression. And all of this with a single justification, as Roger explained in this interview.
Keep them quiet and still and mold them into the right shape so they can go to college and do well.
At that time, teachers could hit students with objects like sticks, rulers, and chalkboard erasers. But according to Roger, the worst abuse was psychological, as they constantly humiliated students in public with mockery and sarcasm. In the movie, this kind of abuse is shown when the teacher mocks Pink's sensitivity after discovering he had written a poem.
What do we have here, young man? Mysterious scribbles? No, nothing less than poems.
Poems, guys!
The money comes back. I'm fine, Jack. Keep your hands off my money.
For those who don't know, the poem read by the teacher is actually an excerpt from the song Money, another hit by Pink Floyd.
I'm alright, Jack. Keep your hands off of my stack.
After humiliating Pink, the teacher hits his hand with a ruler and goes back to teaching, ordering the students to repeat geometry postulates to memorize them.
Repeat after me. An acre is the area of a rectangle whose length is 1 furlong.
This scene exposes a failed education model that doesn't teach students to think or question, but only to repeat and obey. And this is brilliantly represented by the parallel between poetry, an art that explores humanity, freedom, and creativity, and geometry, which brings postulates and axioms that are immutable and unquestionable. A square will always have four sides, whether you agree or not. Then the music resumes. The lyrics reveal his theory about the reason behind the teacher's Machiavellian behavior. But back in the city, everyone knew. At night, when they got home, their fat and psychopathic wives would humiliate them. Just like the lyrics, the movie also shows that the teacher's image as an authority figure falls apart at home, when he is humiliated by his own wife, who orders him to eat a piece of food that he had spat onto his own plate. This shows how many times adults don't know how to deal with their frustrations and take them out on children, causing them suffering and trauma. Next, the most famous and memorable part of this trilogy begins.
We don't need no education.
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. These famous verses are interpreted the wrong way by many people. Pink Floyd was not criticizing education itself. As Roger himself said in an interview, "You won't find anyone more in favor of education than me. But the education I went through in boarding school in the 1950s was very controlling." And that called for a rebellion. That's why in this verse he mentions thought control. They were only criticizing the kind of education that acts as a true ideological state apparatus, shaping identical, ready-made, and dogmatic opinions, and therefore a society that is more easily manipulated. In the movie, this idea is shown in these scenes, where the children march in what looks like a factory assembly line, entering a machine and coming out in front of school desks, wearing identical masks, no facial expression. The reference to the factory also reinforces the symbolism of the bricks, where each student can be interpreted as a brick that makes up society, alienated and without creativity. The next line of the song is one of the most impactful, and a true cry of protest. Hey, teacher, leave the kids alone. In the end, it's just another brick in the wall. In the end, you're just another brick in the wall. Leave the kids alone became a protest cry in many contexts around the world. It was chanted by adults and children who were seeking political change in the country where they lived, from Iran to Palestine and even in South Africa. In the 1980s, during the apartheid era, children from South African schools for black students shouted these words. Verses not against the teachers, but against the educational system of that time, which was extremely unfair and racially segregated. The protest bothered the authorities so much that the song, "Another Brick in the Wall," was banned in the country. After this outcry, the second verse begins, marking a very important point in the narrative. At this moment, interestingly, the band stops singing. From then on, the children from Islington Green School in London take over the song. The idea to bring in the children to sing came from producer Bob Ezrin, who had already worked with giants like Alice Cooper and Kiss. Initially, they thought about using the voices only as background for Roger's vocals. However, the children's choir turned out so powerful and moving that it ended up becoming the main feature of the song. Something very similar to what happened with the classic Wind of Change by Scorpions, where a simple whistle, which almost got removed from the song, was fundamental for it to become a rock anthem. In the movie, this part of the song is represented in these scenes, where the children stand up chanting against the authoritarian teacher as if they were rebelling. Notice that here they are not wearing masks, since they are exercising their true desire to break free from an oppressive system by joining together against it. This shows how music, as a work of art, is capable of creating true anthems of revolution within a society dominated by censorship and alienation. At this point, after David Gilmour's magnificent guitar solo, the teacher gets angry with the students and starts yelling. If you don't eat your meat, you can't have any pudding. How can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? At that time, some English schools gave pudding to students as dessert, but only if they ate all their lunch, that is, the meat. Here, the pudding is a metaphor for the reward, while the meat, as shown in the music video and the movie, represents the person themselves having their identity and individuality torn apart, compensated by the system. In other words, you will only be rewarded if you agree to take part in your own destruction. At this moment, the children who have not yet been freed continue to march blindly toward the meat grinder, while the freed children shout for the teachers to leave them alone. In this scene, we can see that the hammer is one of the elements that make the machine work. Hammers are a symbol used extensively throughout this album's concept, representing a force with ambiguous power, possessing both the power to create and to destroy. Just like the teacher, who at the same time can create useful citizens for society, they can also destroy the creativity and individuality of each child when they act the wrong way. When they see their friends being turned into ground meat, the other students take off their masks and revolt, starting a rebellion. They destroy the entire classroom, knock down walls, and in the end, we see the school in flames, with the children subduing the teacher and celebrating. Next, we see Pink rubbing his hand after being hit with a ruler by the teacher, revealing that all of this was nothing more than a product of his fertile imagination. At the end of part 2, we hear a phone ringing, which signals the beginning of the song, Mother, where Pink talks to his mother, his overprotective mother, revealing his insecurities and asking for advice. And only after 6 tracks do we reach the final part of this incredible trilogy. At this point in the story, a lot of time has passed. Pink is now an old and hopeless rock star, and all he feels is the desire to completely isolate himself. A very strong parallel with what Roger was feeling when he conceived this whole story. Although TV commonly represents alienation, the fact that he destroys it symbolizes Pink rejecting any kind of contact with the outside world. An idea that is reinforced when he says, "I don't need arms around me. I don't need any drugs to calm me down." The fact that Pink repeats these phrases to himself just shows that he's trying to believe in something that isn't true yet. After growing up without a father, being humiliated by teachers, and being abandoned by his wife, he became an insecure and self-conscious adult, as well as having problems with drugs. That's why he believes his only purpose is to isolate himself from everything and everyone. No, I don't think I need anything. No, I don't think I'll need anything. In the end, it was all just bricks in the wall. In the end, you were just bricks in the wall. Pink has reached a point where he is unable to trust anyone, and he sees everyone around him as causes of his traumas, giving his final cry of rebellion against the whole world as he places the last brick in his emotional wall, which completely isolates him from the outside world. And at this point, we hear the song's agitated instrumentation becoming softer and softer, which allows the feeling of anger to be gradually replaced by a sense of melancholy that begins to take over Pink, and which is perfectly captured in the next track of the album, called Goodbye Cruel World, where the protagonist recites with his voice full of sadness the following words.
Goodbye, cruel world.
Goodbye, cruel world. I'm leaving you today. Goodbye to all of you. There's nothing you can say to make me change my mind. Goodbye. Classics like this become true timeless masterpieces that end up transcending generations. If you've stayed with me this far, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you want to discover the hidden genius in another musical work of art, just click on this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.